So right on time. I'm a big fan of just starting when we start. You can probably see I'm not back to my full energetic self, but I promise I'm no longer contagious. But even so, I have masks if you feel like you should stay away from me. And if you're listening on a recording, yeah, you are probably going to hear explosions of noise as I cough. I'm sorry about that. Just want to start with concerns, issues about the assignment. It's one that I've had a few times that has come up. I've given some feed forward in the video that I prepared, and I've put it in the frequently asked questions because it's like, how am I doing? It's that logistical problem. How do I do a PowerPoint presentation or a set of slides and use Cadmus? The easiest way to do it, I'm just trying to, the problem is with the way the slides work, and I just like, there's nothing makes you feel more like a middle-aged lady than trying to use a trackpad mouse backwards on something that's behind you. So I just feel like showing you on the screen will just be really slow. So have a look at the video. But essentially, think about the assignment as having two parts to your communication. So one of the assessment criteria is, one of the learning objectives of this course is you are going to be able to explain complex concepts relating to the legal considerations for these three technologies to a variety of audiences. And so your job for this particular assignment is to help your boss prepare a PowerPoint presentation or a set of slides, a training package for people in your organization. So firstly, start by thinking what the objective is so that you can prepare what you need to prepare in a meaningful way. Now, it's your adventure. You get to choose it. So you've decided what your organization is, and you need to think about who the audience for the PowerPoint presentation is. I'm saying PowerPoint because clearly I use PowerPoint all the time, but you could make it in whatever presentation mode you want to make it in. And chances are there'll be some of you that will be total guns with Canva or Google Slides, or you might just want to hand draw some images or some slides. I don't really care. I was going to say there's no prizes for presentation or how pretty it looks, but actually you will be rewarded when you make good choices about what the images look like, because the idea is they're going to convey these complex ideas to people who know less than you about them. And so effectively, choose your presentation package of choice. All of them will let you save the slides as images. You can slide, so if I do it with PowerPoint in my video, and basically in that video I've literally got Copilot to make me a presentation. I actually have no issue at all with you using Copilot or some sort of AI to help you with your presentation. Just make sure you acknowledge it and make sure that you check it and that it actually does what you need it to do. For the reasons that we will talk about today, the copyright in what the AI produces doesn't belong to you. So you are at risk if you are over-reliant and if you're not acknowledging your sources of being accused of ghostwriting. But I have no problem with you trying to use it for good instead of evil, right? So in my example, just mainly to show you that, yeah, I know what the AI can do. I will recognize what the AI has done for you. I've made an AI presentation, and then you can, in PowerPoint, you can do save as. Save as is JPEG or PNG files. You can save one slide at a time, or you can slide them all, or you save them all when you're finished. And basically you paste those in so again, just like if you were using Word, I've had some feedback on people using Cadmus. Some people are enjoying it, some people are really not enjoying it. Effectively, like the Word toolbar, on the top, there's a little picture of a picture, and surprise, surprise, when you click on that, it will let you upload a picture. So you can upload your pictures, you can move them around. And so effectively, you're asked to do two parts of the communication. One is, these are the slides that you'd recommend your boss uses in this trading package. And again, when we say slides, you might actually think that you might want to use something like a quiz or something like that in the way that you put it together. It's completely up to you. What do you think will help your boss achieve the objectives that you're set? And the objectives that you've set are essentially to address two sets of risks. One relating to the AI big data application that your organisation is rolling out, and the other one to do with the decision or exploring a decision to accept cryptocurrency payments or to make payments to suppliers. So there's basically two parts. And so then you basically are communicating to your boss, who actually probably doesn't know to the level of detail that you've done because you've done the research, but their job is going to be to communicate what the risks are, what staff need to do when they're giving this presentation. If you wish, you can write it as a script. I probably would avoid doing that because you've only got 1,500 words, and a script, you're going to run out of words really quickly. And also, you know yourself, when people come and talk to you with a slide pack and a script, it's bloody boring. And it's also, what's the point of getting your boss up there to talk about these things if all they're going to do is read a script? So what you're doing, you can use bullet points. You need to communicate to your boss what they need to communicate to the staff and why it's important. So think about the ways that you're doing that. It might be as simple as, for each slide you have, by the end of this slide, people need to understand A, B, and C. You need to mention D, E, and F. And also, because your boss is not an idiot, they want to know where you got your information from, and they want to know that they're not just, I call it, speaking from the Paduma Institute, pulled it directly out of my arse. They want to know where your sources are. So you're going to support that with sources as you go. So again, do that directly in Cadmus. If you really hate working in Cadmus, you can do it in a Word document or in Google Docs or whatever you need or want to do it in. The advantage for you and for me when you use Cadmus and you type in there directly is it's not going to flag, part of what it does is it flags concerns about ghostwriting and cheating, and it works with Turnitin to give us some of that information. I think that's the least interesting thing that it does. From my point of view, one of the reasons I want you to use it is I'm constantly making up assignments that are a bit weird and wacky, and I'm trying to actually make assignments that reflect what you would do in the real world. But it's near on impossible for me to get a sense of whether I've got the balance right. So the more data points I get about how long it actually takes you to do an assignment, the more comfortable I am that I'm setting it right. Now you don't necessarily want to invest in that it doesn't help you, right? It helps future students. I get that, which is why you can do what you like. If you are actually prepping it somewhere else, please keep. You can even upload, if you want to, your original document with the metadata in it that shows me that it's your document and that you worked on it. The other advantages that we get out of this, and this might just show you how naive I might be, but pretty much every time anybody has ever submitted an assignment, like any assignment that I've been in charge of, at least one person has had a document that's got corrupted or a computer that has melted down like in the last 24 hours, and it's, like they've lost all their work. It's not going to get lost. Now, I personally find it really hard to believe most of the time, because if you're using Office 365, which you get for free through the university, if you're using Google Docs, or if you're using anything that connects to the cloud, you're never going to lose everything. it can always be retrieved. But I take it, I believe, officially I believe that this happens very often. It's not going to happen if it's on Cadmus. We have the record of when you worked on it. Even if your computer drops out at the very last minute, we can see when you finished. And so that's going to be helpful for you as well. Sorry, I've tried to deal with quite a few things in that. I want you to understand why I want to give Cadmus a go. But the two most important points for you are how to upload the images, and that I'm not expecting an essay or a script. I'm expecting speaker's notes. And that's going to be tricky, because the idea is that your boss should be able to just look at it. It should stand alone. Like, they shouldn't need to be running off to look at 15 different things. In fact, if you look at the rubric, one of the criteria at the higher end is your boss is ready to pick this up and go and start presenting. If that's the way it looks to us, that's a good result. But doing that requires you literally thinking about, well, what's the objective of each of these slides? And one of the things I'd strongly recommend you do is you do the slides last, that you actually work out what you want to say. Because the thing is, we're all like this. When we create something, especially if it's pretty, it's really hard for us to not want to show it to other people, right? So it just feels like we've wasted our time. You haven't wasted your time, because all that time you were doing that, you were thinking about it. But don't include it if it doesn't move your audience's understanding of what they're doing along. Questions? Thoughts? The other, I haven't had this question this time, but I had it a lot last time, was, this feels really similar to the first assignment. Am I doing the same thing again? And kind of the short answer to that is yes. You don't have to use the same technology, and you certainly can go deeper. You're not necessarily having to explain to us why you've identified this as the highest risk, but effectively the feedback that you got last time around should help you do a better job on this one. So the idea is it's scaffolded as we move forward. Any questions? Gee, man, it's super hot in here. Whoops. Oh no, here we go. I have a trophy for today's winner. Just thought you would like to see that. It's enormous for anybody who's watching on a recording. It is clearly it's golden. It's very heavy. It's well and truly worth actually proceeding with. So I would share that with you. And let's see. Oh, only 10 questions. Let's get you in here. So today we're talking about intellectual property rights. And I think today's session will be quite useful for many of you, particularly I want to focus more on the AI big data side, but it is worth thinking about the ways that blockchain technologies could be useful in intellectual property protections. The other thing that I want us to be thinking about is, actually, is this law fit for purpose? Close enough. I am really hoping my AI will cut out the coughing. So, manifestation of an idea. Not all ideas will have a physical form. So not all patent, for example, too many acronyms. Not all intellectual property rights will have a physical presence. So for example, music, which is subject to copyright, the recording is also subject to copyright, but we can't necessarily touch that. Okay, so it's the manifestation, it's making it into something. And really the important thing to understand is intellectual property actually doesn't give anybody an exclusive right or protect an idea. In fact, the policy behind it is the opposite. We reward people for sharing their ideas. But it's interesting that we're seeing that lots, or more and more, there are concerns about people being able to hold on to intellectual property. So keeping that intellectual property secret, so not sharing it and using trade secrets as a way of creating their monopolies. So in what I think is one of the ironies in a naming sense is OpenAI. So OpenAI, which, as you know, owns GTP. Don't know if any of you had a bit of a play with Strawberry that got released this week, which apparently is doing PhD level maths. To be frank, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between year 10 and PhD level maths, so I just believe what they say about it at the moment. But what's interesting about it is it works slower, but it has more reasoning power behind it. OpenAI, its code is secret. One of the things that Zuckerberg is saying at the moment is that Meta's AI is open source. So everybody can see what the code is, everybody can be involved in its creation and its manipulation. So there is a bit of a battle going on about that question, whether traditional intellectual property is the right mechanism. Let's have a look. That Swedish flag. Is that what it is? That's a Swedish flag. Yep. It's very bad for me to admit it, but I know that because of the IKEA catalogue and pretty much nothing else. So, IP, intellectual property, is a creature of statute, right? There are different kinds of intellectual property, but because they're creatures of statute, that means that every jurisdiction deals with it slightly differently. Now, we do have, in relation to intellectual property, a number of international treaties that mean that countries work together, and really, particularly under the World Trade Organizations, we've found that there is a lot more consistency, but we do have different legislation in each place. Now, in the materials, we talk about copyright a lot, and patents a little bit, and trademarks a little bit. But that's not the only forms of intellectual property that exist. And so hopefully thinking about this, thinking about how we don't have just one piece of legislation. We have separate pieces of legislation for different and related things. I mean that thinking about an intellectual property strategy is really important for new and emerging technologies. The lecture material this week, more than half of the actual time in the lecture is me talking to a former student, actually, who is now an intellectual property law specialist. So she did a JD here at RMIT. She was working in a law firm, large law firm, the whole time that she was doing that degree. She's subsequently done a master's in intellectual property at UTS online while she was working she's at Macpherson Kelly, and she's basically sitting in the intellectual property space. So I thought it was quite an interesting conversation to be able to focus in on what's actually happening in the real world there. So if you haven't listened to that, put us on chipmunk speed, have a listen while you go for a walk or something. Now, she's probably most of her focus has been a lot on trademarks and thinking about trademarks, but she has some pretty interesting things to say as well about NFTs, and particularly the opportunity for NFTs to breach other people's intellectual property rights. So she's been looking at the Birkin bag cases in particular, so where people are creating little pixelated Birkin bags. I only know about the Birkin bag from Sex and the City, which I know dates me overly, but also it's just like, is that still a thing? But Birkin are suing people who are creating these bespoke NFTs of Birkin bags, which are just pixels on a screen. I'm out and proud that I don't get NFTs. I don't see them. I feel like they are hype. I feel like it's the Tulip Saga all over again. I really don't understand it. I could sort of understand it if, I can see that there's a market, for example, in gaming for particular weapons or trophies or abilities to open rooms and things like. I can see that there's a market for that. There are actual genuine users who are looking for those things. But NFT artworks makes absolutely no sense to me at all. But I guess we'll see over time. I always feel like I'm the naysayer in the room around blockchain. It's just like I just can't. I want it to be interesting. and to be doing something valuable, and I just don't see it. But anyway, commend you to have a look at that. So, another question. Oh, everybody ready? 9 of you in there. Excellent. So, these negative questions, every time I see one of these and I've got it set up, I think, oh no, I put the wrong answer. That's not the right answer to something. And then I remember it's a negative question. Oh, the public policy rationale behind having intellectual and giving exclusive rights that allow creators to commercialize, which is kind of the third way of saying the other two. So one of the options that inventors always have is to keep their inventions a secret. So not necessarily the end product, but the how they do it. And when we think about that, that's what AI is doing anyway, to a large extent, isn't it? It's solving problems, but to a large extent, we don't necessarily know why or how it's getting to the end result that it does. That's actually one of the things that I found most interesting in my very brief look at Strawberry, or what are they calling it? GPT-01. Yeah. Anyway, I think Strawberry is just easier to remember. But one of the things that's really interesting about that is you can get it to show it's working. And I think that ultimately will be very powerful as well, to think through the logic. And one of the things I'm really interested in is ways that we can be using artificial intelligence to get better at learning. I'm really interested in what Khan Academy and Khan Migo has been doing in primary schools across the whole of the US, actually, and globally. Actually, at risk of just showing how I sit in front of the television every night, there's a series of short documentaries being made with Bill Gates as the star that's just come out of Netflix. I think it just launched yesterday or the day before. So it's Bill Gates looking at the future, and the first of those is on AI. And he talks a lot, he talks to OpenAI. I've got to say, having watched the first two of them, I feel like it's a bit of a Bill Gates PR campaign. But it actually is following, particularly the first one, is really following things that are totally relevant to this course and looking at actually, well, what role can regulation play? What role should the Senate be playing? What kind of regulation is the industry looking for? But also, I think they had some really nice, clear explanations of why things work the way that they do. And, it's quite engaging to look at. Oh, Beyonce's putting a ring on it. So, what have we got here? Incentivizing innovation and creativity by giving creators an exclusive right to monopolize. So, one of the things I think is really interesting about what's happening, particularly with generative AI, is when we've got this battle, which we'll get to as we move on, but I'm sure you're aware of, that things that are created by an AI are not necessarily subject to copyright. So the actual product or output that the AI gives you is most likely public domain information. So if you solve something using AI and then you share the end result, unless you're actually manipulating that end result in a way that means it's your work, then it's not your copyright, the piece that comes out. And when we're using, so one of the main ways that generative AI has been used in the last couple of years, one of the greatest sources of job loss has been in writing code. So organizations that are writing code and are using generative AI to write that code don't necessarily have any copyright or intellectual property over the code that they write. So essentially, there is no incentive for them to share that. The incentive, in fact, is to keep it as secret as possible. And of course, that process isn't free, is it? The computing power that is involved in generating something with AI, it costs money. Now, it feels free to us at one end, especially if, some of us might be paying for some small subscriptions or whatever, and we're not necessarily paying for the API code, but we're limited or throttled in what we can use. It's because every single one of those requests chews up an enormous amount of computing power and has a significant energy impact. So there is a cost in creating these things, but there isn't necessarily, that investment doesn't necessarily relate to ownership. So business people need to be thinking about this. When it says here that inventors must disclose their inventions to the public, that is in order to get the benefit, particularly of a patent. So you can't have a secret trademark. It doesn't work like that. In fact, unless you use the trademark, you will not get to own it. And similarly, you only get exclusive rights to exploit an invention under a patent if you have actually shared the patent or the how to build it with the world. So, can you own an idea? I was trying to see here. This is probably the most important thing that I want you to come away with thinking about this. The ideas themselves are not protectable under IP law. Instead, it's the expression or the manifestation of the idea that is protected. So, if you make a blockbuster drug and you can find a different chemical compound to get to the same outcome, the outcome is not protected. Like we want, I think, as I understand it, more money has been invested in trying to find a drug to make sure men don't go bald than to actually get rid of malaria. But so if somebody ever does solve that problem, if there is a drug that will stop male pattern baldness, if there are two ways of doing that, nobody will have the ownership over that idea. But each of those are likely to be patented as different ways of doing the same thing. I feel like I'm being very sermony today. Everybody's really, is it just me? Or like, because I'm not feeling 100%, so let's have a look. Everybody's clear on trademarks. I think the best example of that is Apple. We understand Apple. There is no way that Steve Jobs and Wozniak would have got a trademark over the word Apple if they were selling groceries. But because they were selling computer equipment, they were able to apply that name that has nothing to do with computer equipment to the materials. So distinctive. People up fast. Everybody's there. Nobody fell for the shiny leather shoes. Should have put it first. Great. So exclusive rights to exploit an invention for a period of time. So they don't own the invention, they just have the rights to exploit it. So how do they exploit it? What does that look like as a set of legal documents, for want of another word? What do they do? If you had a patent, how could you exploit it? So, and what would that look like? Like, how would you actually do that? So, you've invented something that, what does it do? I like to have an idea. Let's go with male pattern baldness. You've invented that drug, whatever. So basically, if I'm going around with a copied version, because I've just gone to the patents office and I've looked at your patent and I've just basically created the same thing, because that's the way I roll, what do? Yeah, you sue me, basically, for breaching your patent. So you've got that. So you sue me. Now, you need to have the patent in all of the places where we're operating. And then probably what I do in exchange is I then challenge your patent. I just say, no, it's not novel, or it wasn't useful, or I go through what the patent requirements are, and then we have a stoush. So interestingly, in the order of half the patents that are awarded in Australia that get challenged are unsuccessful. Ultimately, when they're challenged, they fall over. So part of your intellectual property strategy needs to be, yes, getting the patent, but also making sure that you can enforce that patent and that you can support that patent. Because, of course, not every patent that ever gets awarded gets challenged either, right? We're still talking about quite a small percentage, but it's, they're not set in stone. What else can you do if you're exploiting those works, that invention? How else do you do that? What kind of other legal process might you have?
We can sell it like to the highest bidder.
Yeah, you could transfer the patent to somebody else. So the patent needs to have an inventor, and the applicant needs to have some connection to the inventor, but once it's actually granted, you can sell it off to somebody else. So you can have, from this point onwards, control over male pattern baldness. So what do you do with it? What other kind of legal process might you have to save the world from this scourge?
We're able to market it however I please.
Yeah, you can. Well, actually, that's it. Market it however you please.
In the original, in its original manifestation.
Marketing is kind of interesting. So we've got the patent, so we've got the invention, and so you can basically make the chemical compound. You can make the tablets or the lotion, or what will we make it? It can be a lotion, I think. You make the shampoo, you put it in the bottles, but then you also get to decide what you call it, right? So that's where you might be looking for a trademark, or the design of the bottle that you put it in. Some very furry dome of some sort. You might have that as some sort of design. The packaging itself might be something that has its own design or invention protection. They give geeks a hard time for being so focused on science and maths and stuff like that, but there's all sorts of things that would never have happened in culture and society if inventions weren't made. Bizarrely, I'm thinking of the metal tubes that you can put paint in. We would never have had impressionist paintings if we didn't have those tubes, because people could take their paint outside and paint in real life. The tiniest things can change society as we know it. But you've just paid him what, $1 billion, probably US bucks at that, for his invention there, and I think that's probably cheap at half the price, really, for how much money you're likely to make. But are you going to be there pressing pills and sending them out, or doing this marketing? How are you going to make it work? How are you going to capitalise on this, on your investment? So I put you on the spot. He's got a board of directors here. What would you be recommending to him to do? He's got his legal team over here as well. What would you do?
Find a way to sell it.
Licensing is probably where I'm going for, is that actually once you own the patent, you then get to grant rights under that patent. You do that in contract. So effectively create contracts with people that you trust. You do a deal with them, and they will pay you however you structure it. It's not defined by law. In the case of drugs, the traditional way of doing it is you pay a royalty. So one of the reasons why generics, one of India's biggest export industries is generic drugs. So effectively, there are factories or chemical compounding places in India really good at what they do, but they're not paying the high-level license for the drugs that are still under patent. It's when they get to that 20 years' time, if they haven't been extended for some reason, then at that point, the information is in the public domain. They're taking those drugs that have been successful, that have established a market, and creating generic versions of them. So that's why when you get asked at the chemist, do you want the brand name or will a generic do? For the most part, if you're a tight ass like me, you're saying, I'll take the generic, thank you very much, because it's identical substance, right? It's made based on the information that's in the patent, but it's made after that exclusivity period. In the exclusivity period, then we have that ability to license and to control the marketing, to control what's said about it. But there's a whole lot of different legal considerations that come into it. So, you're probably unlikely to be able to go and tell the world it works in 110% of cases and makes you more virile and smarter. Unless the drug actually does those things, you can't be misleading or deceptive in what you say about it. And again, depending on the kind of thing, well, I'm using drugs as an example here, but it may be that you've got the patent in all of these different jurisdictions, but unless and until you have Therapeutic Goods Act approvals or the equivalents in the jurisdictions, you probably still can't sell it. There's a whole lot of processes that go in there, and there's a lot of investments. Using a drug as an example is a really good example of how intellectual property works, because the costs and the risks in the development stage are so extreme. But the blockbuster drugs, the output, the result is absolutely phenomenal. Little bit of changing there. Oops, wrong way. I forget that I have to actually hit this button to do that. IP Australia, terrible name, but IP Australia, probably one of the most useful websites, by the way, for you, particularly if you've got any intellectual property considerations that you're thinking about for this next assignment. And you might be thinking about it in terms of, do we own and can we use the intellectual property that we have, but also how can we protect the outputs. So having a look at their website, what's involved, it's really straightforward. They're clearly really anti-lawyers. I think they just actually want to make sure that business knows how to deal with all that stuff themselves. And so really useful website to have a look at. There is no such thing as the Australian Patent Office. Oh, actually, seeing your name there, Lachlan, has reminded me that you have an event to spruik for us. Why don't we do that for a second? Tell us what this is.
I'm with the Business Student Association, and we're putting on a really big marketing event at the Capitol Theatre just down Swanston Street. Free champagne canapes. If you guys want to get along. Yeah, it's a free event. We've got a handful of speakers talking about our direction of marketing and also technology. If that's an area that anyone's interested in. It's not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after, the 2nd of October. So yeah, if anyone's free Wednesday night and has nothing better to do and wants to get out, maybe go with a friend, sign up.
The last event these guys put on I thought was really excellent. It was just totally on key for this particular course. Clearly marketing directly, not directly relevant here, but I think the sorts of issues that we think about in this course, because it's such a broad legal considerations course with a focus on the technology, the kinds of issues that are coming up in relation to even particularly the stuff we're doing today about how you can talk about your products and services, how you can engage people, also the algorithmic way that people engage with their customers now. I think there's plenty that you can get out of it, and who doesn't like a procrastinacanapé? Sorry, you were about to say something.
I was going to mention that also a lot of big consulting companies and even the new marketing tech companies are there, and like I've talked to a lot of them, like it's not like they're a full team of marketers on board. It's like there's one or two marketers and everyone else is business, tech, and lawyers.
Yep.
Because that's really like what's needed now. So there's a bunch of like there's an AI creative agency. I think they have like one or two marketers, and then it's all just like.
Yeah. No, and I think again, I'm assuming most of you are in, the upper end of your degree now by the time you get to having to do this course. I mean, some of you who actually are interested might have chosen it, but usually people will put it off until as long as they possibly can. Just the word legal considerations will do that to you. But it is actually a really good opportunity. I would take as many of these as you can to look at what actually people are doing out in the world and talking about how they work.
And also, the whole thing is like the future of marketing, so it's lots to do with tech and like the liability of like fraud and stuff involved with that. So the event's Future of Marketing on Humanities, free to sign up.
I'll send a link around afterwards. So, yeah. And also, I just think we should support people who actually get off their asses and do something while they're at uni. Personally, that's just me being old school. Let's have a look. 20 years for a standard patent. Interesting that a number of people went with 10. Do you think that's long enough? Do you think it's too long, 20 years? Think about it. Stuff that wasn't invented when 9/11 happened, but basically patents were delivered in the following years, is now out of patent. Now, that's me, like being old. Like, feels like just the other day. What do we think? 20 years, is that a reasonable amount of time? It's a long time when there's something. So, and there are arguments. There's a big group of social scientists, I guess, who have a strong belief that providing statutory monopolies is unfair. Any of you heard of, I've forgotten his first name, Salk, S-A-L-K? He was involved in creating a little thing called the polio vaccine. He was very much of the view that his objective was to eradicate polio, not to make a whole heap of money. And so one of the things that he did right from the outset is actually just shared the data and the information. So the polio vaccine is one of the only kind of blockbuster drugs that is not subject to patent and never has been. It's in my mind at the moment because of what's happening in the Middle East, and there have been some outbreaks of polio in Gaza, and there's a big World Health Organization push at the moment to vaccinate children in Gaza. But there have been points of time in the last few years where it's actually been, you've been able to say that polio is eradicated. So probably it would be grandparents or great-grandparents, but chances are there is somebody, if you go back in your family 3 or more generations, who suffered from polio. It was everywhere, and it was very debilitating, and it killed a lot of children. A lot of lives were lost, and it's pretty much in one generation was eradicated because of the vaccine that was not subject to a patent. There was a reasonable amount of discussion with COVID vaccines about whether or not they should be subject to patents protections or not. And ultimately most of them are, but there's also been basically statutory overlays that have required them to be used and produced in particular ways. There was a lot in the early to mid-90s, there was a lot of international controversy around whether AIDS medications, particularly PrEP and similar medications, should be subject to patent or should be made available internationally for low or no cost. And, well, you can do the research, but that's a sad story. Let's have a look here. So quiet. Okay, so in order to get a patent, the thing that you've ended up with needs to demonstrate novelty, an inventive step, and utility. At risk of putting too fine a point on it, being too broad in the way I talk about it, inventive step means that it needs to be not obvious to people who are trained in the relevant art. So this has become a real issue when it comes to inventions that may or may not be inspired or worked on by artificial intelligence. Because here we are, our professor of male pattern balding expertise. I'm thinking, how did you get to be so wise about this particular issue? Chances are that you studied biology or hair, whatever the study of hair is. You probably have a PhD, which means that you've read a lot of stuff and you've done some experiments and you've thought about this issue in a whole heap of ways. Over in Camp Technology here, we have a group of people who are able to isolate every single paper that's ever been written about male pattern baldness. Thank you for that. Every single thing. Plus, they might have thrown in some other stuff that they think, just on a hunch, might be relevant. I don't know. Instagram photos of male models for forever. I don't know. Imagery of Shane Warne playing cricket. Whatever it is that you absolutely need to understand male pattern baldness. This AI, which of them, sorry, am I picking on your hair here? I have no idea what's under the cap.
I'm going to be bald in like 5 years. I just.
Well, these guys are working on it for you as well, all together. It's all good. That's just so me. I'm just going to humiliate somebody without actually meaning to. And it's really not my style, because if I humiliate you, I want to do it on purpose.
I really don't mind.
Thank you. That's very good. So which of us over here, team of people with a massive AI, crunching absolutely everything, and our one very smart professor of baldness over here, which of you is more likely to be able to pass all of the data based on what we know today? These guys, right, okay? Because literally in minutes or hours, probably minutes, you can train an AI on everything that's ever been written. Where actually you have to read it all, it's got to stick in your head, and then within minutes, this AI can make connections between the many papers that it has read. Actually, when and how often that happens, we don't really know enough about how the human brain works to know, but it's not going to be happening in minutes and hours, right? So now one of the questions that's coming up with inventions are, well, if an AI can work it out, based on the material that's already out there in the world, surely then it's obvious. Surely there's no inventive step. Surely it's not something that is new to the world. Do you think, what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you as an argument? It can't be inventive, it's already out there and a computer can just pass it from the data. So even if, let's accept that argument for the time being, you can kind of think about it. Does it mean that the invention is less useful? No, I don't think it does either. We get to it quicker. So one of the things I'm wanting you to think about is, are these the right criteria in this world? It gets harder and harder to prove that inventive step as we've had more and more technologies available to us to record and pass information. Just put that in front of you for a moment. Go Zoe. See, everybody's fighting for this golden trophy. I think I'm going to be really quick today. We might be having a short shoot. I'm covering everything I want to cover. Sometimes we get the timing wrong. So the legislation needs to have a human inventor. So the applicant can be a company. The applicant doesn't need to be human, but the legislation requires a human inventor. Does anybody, can anybody tell me how I know that for sure? Why I'm confident about that statement? There was a case. So the case is the Darbus case, it's Thera and IP Australia. So actually, I think I've got a slide. Let's see who's the winner chicken dinner here. Oh, yes, I've got a slide about it. So, not Thera, Thaler. We go, there's Dr. Thaler. So Dr. Thaler created an AI called Darbus, which he then put towards inventing things. Came up with 2 inventions. I'm just having a senior moment. I can't remember what they were. One of them was a storage device from memory. Anyway, he applied for patents around the world, naming Darbus as the inventor. And Justice Beach in the federal court in Australia said, yeah. So IP Australia basically said, no, we can't give you this patent because it's an AI inventor. That's not the spirit of the legislation. That's not what the legislation says. So we're not going to give you a patent. So Thaler then appealed that decision, got to the federal court, got to Justice Beach, and Justice Beach said, well, yeah, actually, it's novel. There was an inventive step. It meets all of those other requirements, and that legislation, well, sure, it was written with humans in mind, but actually the world has moved on. Ultimately, the full court of the federal court looked at Section 15 because it was appealed and looked at the wording in the section. So it says a patent can be granted to a person, so person, oh, it's so hard to balance this, who is the inventor, is the legal representative, etc. So they then unpicked what the legislation said, and person in that context is not a legal person, not a legal representative, but a human person. And the federal court said, if the legislation or the legislature wants to change to adopt the idea that an invention can be made by a machine, then the legislation needs to change. So this reminds us that patents they're not a God-given right, they're not a common law right in that sense of there's some sort of common law right to ensure that your rights aren't trespassed on. They are a creature of patent. So a creature of legislation, and so they only protect what the legislation says that they protect. Now, these cases were held all over the world. The only place in which Thaler successfully got a patent was South Africa, and the process there is slightly different, so it's more an administrative process, and the language in the legislation is different. But in every other place where he appealed, ultimately we've ended up with the same result as the full court of the federal court, full bench of the federal court. And this is consistent with the monkey copyright case, Naruta case. So I talk about this a little bit in the lecture, but I just want to remind you about it. When was the timing of this? I'm not sure if I've got it on my notes. I don't. So this photograph here, so this guy, photographer, he was out in somewhere in Indonesia or Borneo, I think, taking photos of monkeys. And I really am having can't remember facts day. Essentially, this lovely smiley face here, Naruta was her name. She came along, picked up his camera and took a selfie. He sold the selfie to National Geographic and it became quite famous, right? So the photo itself was taken by the monkey. So PETA, you've heard of them, the US version of the RSPCA, basically sued the photographer and National Geographic on behalf of Naruta the monkey, essentially saying that Naruta had taken the photograph, so the copyright in the photograph belonged to her, and acting as her next friend, they should get the proceeds of that, the exploitation of that artistic work, which should be then used by PETA to help protect animals in the jungle. What do we think of this? No. Why not? I mean, surely, this is not a particularly beautiful photo, is it? It's like, what makes this photo interesting is the fact that it's been taken by a monkey, right? Yeah. So that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it valuable. So why shouldn't the monkey benefit from the artistic work? Well, there's a difference between not being harmed and benefiting. No students have actually been harmed in any of my classes, but whether any of you actually benefit, only time will tell. It is a very good question. Maybe I should not put it out there. There's a difference between, it's not being harmed, but why should the photographer benefit from this? What makes him? He didn't take the photo. He brought the equipment. I mean, Tenzing Norgay took all the equipment up to the top of Everest, but Hillary was the one who got the praise for being there first. It is another story, but people carry equipment, right? I mean, should the roadie get equal share of the output of every Taylor Swift concert? She's not lugging those big speakers, but what do we think? In India, legal decisions have been made that give rivers and trees legal personality and give them rights. I hope most of us would agree that animals have rights. So why not economic rights? Why not benefit from the copyright that they make? Because we take it to the next step. You can see where this is going, right? Well, what about an image that gets created by an AI? Who gets the copyright in that image? So ultimately the case was settled, which is kind of interesting. It's pretty clear, because of language pretty similar to what we saw in the Patents Act, that the copyright requires a human creator. So, and that's while this is a US case, it also had jurisdictional issues because the actual photograph was taken in Indonesia, it was sold by National Geographic, so it went all over the place. But essentially, the law as it stood requires that human creative process. And what it's protecting is the manifestation. And part of the argument is that actually, without this guy, you would never have actually been able to end up with the print, right? You would never actually get there in the end. But ultimately it was settled, and partly because National Geographic doesn't want to be seen as exploiting animals, right? So it was settled as a commercial matter. But it is pretty interesting to think about. So copyright basically protects a range of different artistic works. So literary works, artistic works, musical works, dramatic works, but also software and digital creations. And in Australia, we don't need to register copyright, but it's not a bad idea. So I know there are musicians in the room somewhere, or in this class somewhere, but most of you, if you are creating your own music, will be registering with APRA, for example, to ensure that royalties get paid your way, that there needs to be some kind of logistics around connecting the payment for musical works, the royalty payment back. It's kind of interesting to me that we also have a system in Australia for registering and maintaining the moral integrity for Indigenous artists' work, so visual art. But my partner is a musician. He writes music, and every quarter, kind of an amount of money will come through into our bank account from APRA. Sometimes it's a very small amount of money, and then sometimes it's even smaller. But I look at it and I think there are agreements that I wrote 30 years ago, which I know those clauses are being used again and again and again. And I still think there's got to be some sort of royalty pattern for things that you write as a lawyer, but it never comes through. What has happened in more recent times in copyright law is this addition of the moral right. So the rights to attribution and integrity of your work. I think I got a question about that, so actually let's move on to that. Sorry. How are you guys going? Do you want to take a break? Or I reckon I'm going to be finished in the next 20 minutes anyway, and we'll finish about half an hour earlier if we keep going. Is that all right? I'm getting a general nod. I'm not quite sure. So, right to attribution is one of the moral rights. I pretty much gave that away, so I don't even know why we had that. It's there. So I'm hoping, yes, I do have a slide on the moral rights. So, because I'm really interested in thinking about this in terms of AI. Because we think about what AI is trained on, And it's basically trained on the internet, as far as we know, right? It's lots of images, lots of data points, lots of personal blogs. One of the reasons why we have so much risk of bias in AI output is because it's basically looking at extreme points of view one way or the other from the internet. But, the training process is getting better. This, I think, is one of the things that you might find is really useful when you're looking at your AI for your assignment. Thinking about, well, what is it being trained on? Is it open source data that's being trained on? Are we at risk of breaching or impacting somebody else's moral rights? In an announcement that I sent earlier this week, please tell me if I didn't do this because I do feel like I'm a little spacey at the moment. There's a really interesting case that has been initiated in New York last week. I think it came out on about the 6th of September, where essentially criminal charges have been brought against a person who has been using AI to write music and then using AI bots to listen to that music and has basically been paid millions of dollars in royalties for AI music and it's this kind of virtuous circle, non-virtuous circle when you think about it. The music's been created by an AI and listened to by an AI, but the money has gone to the human being. And so he's been charged with fraud. There's clearly a copyright issue that's there. It's under US law, so it's not directly relevant to what we do. But all our AIs are being trained on material. And unless it's a closed set of data that we're aware of what the data is, we don't know where it's coming from. Unless, of course, the trainer is telling us and how that works. So 3 parts to moral rights. Moral rights can be waived, but they can't be assigned. So you can say, I agree to not have my right of attribution. So I am pretty sure it must be somewhere in my employment contract with RMIT that I've agreed somewhere to waive my right of attribution, because I see slides that I've created all over the place. Who knows where they come from? You, as a student, if you do an exceptional piece of work and that gets published with the university branding all over it because it's so awesome, you have a right to be attributed. You also have a right not to have authorship of a work falsely attributed, both to you and to somebody else. And you also have a right, and this is the one that I think is most interesting in the context of AI, is a right to integrity of the authorship. So if you have a manifesto and you say 10 things, and only one of them gets circulated, so out of context, it makes you sound like a complete loony, you have a right to say, no, the integrity of the work, I need all of those 10 things in my manifesto to be published. Just the fact you have a manifesto means I think you're a bit loony, but it was the first word that came to my head. So you have a right to have all of your work considered in its entirety. Again, thinking about this from the point of view of the way that AI is trained on data, we don't know where those works are coming from. Interesting. Okay. All right, so what do you think? Should works that are created by AI be subject to copyright? Who thinks they should? But one? Do you have a point of view? Yes, no? You don't know? Okay, what I'm actually wanting to do is actually just get you to stand up, because we're going to debate this. Everybody stand up. If you think that AI should be subject to copyright, I want you to come over here. And if you think that it shouldn't, I want you to come over here. Let's physically move ourselves around to represent AI for copyright.
Should. Did you say that should and shouldn't?
Should, shouldn't. Okay, so we've got roughly, that's good. Okay, let's work out what we're going to do. I am going to now split you. I want to end up with 4 groups, but I want you to be roughly half-half, for and against. We'll work out what we're going to do there. So let's think about you. You can be an AI developer, a legal professional, a business that uses AI, or artists, musicians, creatives. So, artists over here. You're an artist. Get another artist over here. Off you come. I've forgotten your name, which is really rude of me. Tim. There we go. We'll start with 2. Okay, where are our lawyers? Who are our law students in the room? Have we? Only one. Only one lawyer. Whoa, we might just see what we do. We might keep you separate for a minute. Okay, I want you two and you two to go together, and you're going to be a business that uses AI to do something. We'll decide what it is, but it's going to rip off the artists, whatever it is, right? And then, so that means I'm going to make the rest of you AI developers. I'm going to put you with the AI developers. All right, so effectively what we are going to do is I want each of your groups from your perspective to come up with what is the risk, the legal risk from your perspective, if AI should get protected by copyright, if it does get the benefit, and if it doesn't. So I want 2 answers from each group. What are the risks? What's your issue? You ended up as a very small group. If anybody wants to be, because we've got 4, 4, and 2. Let's just, actually, I'm going to bring you over there. We'll do 3, 3. 3 and 4. All right, there we go. So I want you to think from each of you, and then up. Each group is going to give me 2 answers about what the risks are, and then we'll have a debate. We'll work out what it should be. I thought by making you stand up, I would get some energy in the room, but no, not happening. So go stand up, talk to each other. If you don't know each other's names, can you introduce yourselves to each other and work from there?
Yeah, well, that's what, yeah, I think of it. If I make a song using AI, because I don't know how to play it. If I use the AI to make it, even though it's orchestra piece, because I don't know how to like write an orchestra piece by myself. And then I make that, people love it, people enjoy it, but then it's not subject to copyright because one, I didn't make it, even though I yeah, because like yeah, exactly. But then I guess on the flip side, if I make an AI write a million songs a day with the most generic lyrics or the most generic words, whatever, then someone else tries to make a song like actually I already made that song ages ago.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
How you going?
Good.
Good?
We're the AI developers.
Yep.
So we think that if, let's say, musicians are going to use our dumb rights that we've encoded
Yeah.
and created, then the rights are ours.
Okay, cool. Let's talk to them about that in just a second. How are you guys going? Will we come back and have a conversation with the groups?
Risks in general, but we aren't.
So what risk have you got?
We've got risks like if you were able to copyright and protect stuff, the idea of generating, because it's all trained on similar data sets. If you pop out a similar output to someone else, like breach copyright because you think you've generated it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of kind of links in that chain. One is, well, if you're using AI to produce something, and then the AI has been trained on a range of different data, and you are inadvertent copying or breaching somebody else's, or it is, then that's one level of risk.
Yeah.
But then there's also the level of risk of actually, if it's been created by AI, even if it's not infringing anybody else's rights, is it protecting other people's moral rights? And is it something that of itself can be subject to copyright? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. The moral rights, to me, I think, actually, if we don't know what data sets it's looked at, and when we think about it, you know, that T in GPT, that transformer is really about the ways that anything is data now. Absolutely anything is data. And so we actually don't know whether it has been inspired. So we use this language that's about, and it's neural networks, right? So we're using language that's connected to the way that we think and that we create. But it could be inspired by the DNA in an odor. It could be inspired by previous works. It could be inspired by the prompt. We don't know where it comes from. Similarly to how we don't actually know how humans really create.
Yeah.
So, again, you can spend a lot of money creating something
Yeah.
because it's not free, right?
Yeah.
It is not free to create things on with an AI at the moment, but then not be able to exploit it. But also, you might actually be breaching somebody else's rights. The other thing is, if you've got your own intellectual property, how do you feel about that being passed by this AI, by somebody, a competitor's AI, to go to the next, with a prompt that's something like, build me a male pattern baldness solution that doesn't reflect what's in this,
Yeah.
like that doesn't breach this intellectual property.
You use somewhat ChatGPT like sometimes you just speak about a diagram and I'll actually say here I'll show you an image of it. They're not doing it, the AI is. So
Yeah.
the AI's done it for you. The AI's created, so I reckon it should be AI's copyright. It should be copyrighted by the AI. But like even if you never ask AI, the AI can still do it. That's why you're asking the AI in the first place. So I think the AI has copyright over making those like paintings and
So, yeah.
So the AI is not a legal personality, though. But then you might be arguing that the law needs to be changed.
yeah, it's old. It's old. It's
Yeah.
been around for hundreds of years.
Let's bring everybody together because we're talking about similar issues. I don't actually care whether you put something up or not. But let's actually, okay, so we've got our AI developers over here. Where did you land? What are the biggest legal risks? And what do you think looking at it from the point of view of if AI ultimately can have copyright or if it can't? What did you see as being your biggest risks?
Yeah, we thought that we would get copyright because we developed the AI.
Okay.
I guess the risks are that if someone does something that it's not ethical or
So basically you're saying, we built it, we made it, if you go and use it for something else, then we own the output.
yeah.
So somebody can correct me, I'm probably going to make a complete ass of myself here, but like 400 odd years ago or so, a guy called Stradivarius was making violins. So should copyright in every piece of music that was ever written on a Stradivarius violin be, attributed to him? Because that was the tool that people used to write.
Yeah, I'm sure he's like musical instrument.
Yeah.
It is actually is credited in a lot of music. Like anyone who
Yeah.
plays the song.
So that's a moral right? Yeah.
Yeah, anyone who plays any music with that violin has to specify that they are using that sort of violin. Not so much in music though, like actually.
So the actual writing of the music. Okay, so let me use another thing. I write a novel. It's heart-renderingly charming, amusing, and your whole outlook in life has changed from reading my novel. I write it using Microsoft Word. Should Microsoft Word get some sort of credit because that's the tool that I use to create? The spelling in it is immaculate because I use spell check, which is a form of AI. Again, we've got this kind of like, where's the tool? And these guys over here are talking about, so they're the musicians and creators. Interestingly, I think they landed at a kind of similar space. Or at least one part of the argument was. So you've created some music using AI tools. Tell me who should own it.
Well, I feel like the AI should because if you ask the AI to like write you a script, you haven't written it, the AI has.
Mm.
And so like in that sense, I feel like it should be the AI with copyright. But you see on the flip side, you've asked the AI to do it for you, so. Like if it wasn't for you, the AI wouldn't have made it.
So there's a version of that where I'm going to call you guys my organic intelligences. I'm asking you to write an assignment for me, and you write it. So should I own the copyright in what you end up with because, like, I'm the one who set the problem in the first place? Look, doesn't I've been a lawyer for 30 years. It doesn't matter what you say. I'll just argue the other side, right? Like, it comes with the territory. It's kind of how we're built. But I think there's an underlying assumption in here is that somebody needs to own it. Actually, the way the law works at the moment, combination of Naruto, the monkey case, and Sailor would suggest that if it is truly the work of the artificial intelligence or the non-human intelligence, from a copyright and a patent perspective, it's public domain. So what do you guys, I've saved the business people to last, what do you think about that? I mean, I don't know what your Azure bill is like, but my guess is if you're pumping a whole lot of their musical output and you're using their software to develop stuff, you're spending a small fortune. Why? Just because you want to see what will come out of it, or do you want to make some money? Yeah. We're finished for the day. Clearly. It's just having a little meltdown. Sorry about that. No idea whether I'm still... But, sorry, go on. So you want to protect your output. What other risks are you addressing in that process? So ultimately you want to own or be able to exploit. I'm putting words in your mouth. When you say protect the output, I'm assuming that what you're meaning there is we want to own or be able to exploit the output in some way. We want to derive profit from the output. We're spending money on their software. We're probably ripping these guys off, to be perfectly frank, but let's come back to that risk in a minute. But we're creating something. And, I'm going to go back to the male pattern baldness, and it might be that it's inspired by the musical musings of the violin and I heard you talk about Billie Eilish and her recording of the light crossing. I find that fascinating. I think that's really interesting. That's apparently when she and her brother were in Australia, they recorded crossing the lights, like boom, boom, boom. Very cool. And so the question becomes, is that an instrument? Does that belong to her? Is it, how is it different from a recording of something that's been played? Or is it just something that doesn't belong? And is it just public domain? I think the answer on that one is relatively clear, because intellectual property rights do not protect ideas. They protect the execution of that idea. So if you were to take that recording that she made and use that, or sample it in some way and reuse it, yes, you would, and in fact ultimately you would need to get releases because it's her copyright material and she would get the royalty from that. But if you were instead to go out and record your own, and again, one of the things, understanding copyright battles, this is the whole, Taylor Swift re-releasing her music. I've not tried. I'm reliably informed by a 10-year-old friend of mine that she can't hear the difference between the two versions of 1989, but she is 10 and I'm not sure she's ever listened to a whole song from beginning to finish, beginning to end. But at the end of the day, what was that about? That was saying, okay, somebody else owns these recordings and they're making more money out of it than I'd like to see them make. I'd like to make a bit more of that. I'm just going to do it again. They're different recordings. I've got the copyright in these recordings. I get the money. Okay, so it's pretty easy to understand how that part of it works. But now you guys, you want to exploit some sort of intellectual property. You're going to cure male pattern baldness with it. You're using their IP and somehow, not sure why, but you're passing all of this creative work to do it. So there are two kinds of risks that I see. One is that whatever you create is created by the IP and maybe is open source. But secondly, whatever you create actually may well be reliant on other people's intellectual property, which is subject to moral rights, but also might need to be licensed, or you might need a release to use it. Problem with AI, unless the way that so you've got a contract here, right? So we're thinking about contract. You're using their technology. So the contract is going to say something about what you're allowed to do with the technology. And chances are that early on, now, if your AI is bespoke and is only basically learning from data or information that's been selected, then I'm thinking these guys probably want you to promise that you've already got the rights to use this stuff. So that's another contract that's happening here. Otherwise, you might be saying, yeah, actually, our AI you decide who to train it on. We're not taking any responsibility, and it's up to you to get those rights if you need them. And you might not know whether you need them or not, right? So again, this is the complexity that comes out. And I know probably the risk I've taken with the way that I've designed this course this type around, I think I've told you this before, last time we started with the technologies and then we looked at the different legal aspects. I've swapped it around so we're doing kind of a different legal consideration each week and trying to look at each of the technologies. But the real world doesn't work like that. We can't say, oh, it's week 8, so it's only intellectual property. Actually, we've got to think about how the contracts work. We've also got to think about what the legislation says and what good policy is and what we're trying to achieve from it. So, given that you had a chance to think about it, let's start again. Who thinks that AI should have the ability to own and create intellectual property? Yeah? Still a minority. Interesting. I think personally, I think there's a really big policy question there. I suspect that that's the easiest answer in the long run because we've got a model that we know and we understand internationally, and it would be a relatively simple fix if we were to say, actually, if we took out the human being from the Creative Act, if we reimagined what that looks like. But right now, that's not the case. But it creates a whole heap of complexities, and particularly when we don't know, because one of the things, how do we deal with a breach of copyright? We need to sue somebody for breaching our copyright, which means we need to be able to prove that they actually copied our stuff. And when we've got a black box AI, that's going to be really difficult. So I think it's quite interesting. Let me go, I think I've got one more question here. Let's talk about this. Let's just talk about it as a group. What's the business impact if AI works can't be protected by intellectual property? So again, based on, I didn't look, but based on watching this documentary last night with Bill Gates, headline they were splashing over everything was that in 2022, 4,000 jobs were lost to AI in the US. I suspect it could be a much higher number than that, but 4,000 people lost their jobs because the thing that they were doing was replaced by an artificial intelligence.
A lot of businesses, especially newcoming ones, will be in some ways negatively affected. If anything that's AI generated doesn't have a right, then even as the user of the output or the creator of the output, you can't. You're not protected. So
yeah.
Therefore, what if I make an AI and what AI is already smarter than the latest OpenAI model is smarter than 95% of people, and that's one that anyone can use. So if I use one of them to make a really good computer program that solves a really big issue, I can't. That's not protected by copyright because it wasn't created by me. I was the inventor, and if I were to pawn it off as my own, then that'd be fraud. So
that would be fraud. But what else could you do though? Okay, so you can't use intellectual property rights to do it. But let's think strategically. There are probably other things you can do. You look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, say you generate something, is that technically stored somewhere where it's public information, or is it really whatever you generate, you just read it, be cool, and it's kind of in the nether?
That really depends on you and what your technology you're using and where you're doing it. And that's kind of where I was going, because think about what's the public policy reason for having intellectual property rights is we are, in exchange for you sharing your idea with us, we're going to give you an exclusive right to exploit it. And the incentive is for you to share your ideas. So if it's not going to be protected, then the incentive will be to keep it a secret. Okay? So actually, who can do that? when we think about it, there are about 10 companies in the world that are running this game, right? Google, Meta, Microsoft, well, OpenAI sits in under there, Tencent, Alibaba, Amazon. There's a list of these mega companies. They're not countries, they're companies, right? And a lot of that is consolidated in the US or in China. It's a different way of actually thinking about how the world works. So I'm thinking right now, if I'm replacing my coders in my organization with AI, then I'm wanting to make sure that I've got really strong security in place so that that code is hidden. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. Why do we have code that we can actually read? People who can code, they see it as letters and numbers. Actually, machines don't need, they need machine-readable code, right? They don't actually need human-readable code. There's actually no particular reason why, if you're developing code with AI, that you actually need to produce it in a human-readable format. But again, there are probably risks associated with that as well. So one of the things that you might want to look at as you're thinking about these kind of risks and the way that these things work is look at human in the loop and human on the loop. The extent to which do we need to have a person involved, whether that's to make sure that we get our intellectual property rights, but also to make sure that we understand what's going on, or are we just kidding ourselves? Again, I'm kind of always interested in hearing people say things like, we need to keep, we need to make sure that people have their purpose. I'm going to sound like an asshole here, but why? Actually, we're just biology at the end of the day, and what's next? It may well be that our purpose was to create the AI that will create the next AI and get rid of us all. I'm thinking the AI will do more harm to the planet than we have, but who knows? What's my next question for you? What do you think should happen if AI infringes somebody else's intellectual property? So a human's intellectual property. Do we treat it any differently?
When you say infringes, is it like they generate an output that uses someone else's intellectual property, or that generation is being implemented or utilized?
So an infringement will have a technical meaning under the legislation. Excuse me. So if we're talking about copyright, we're talking about using somebody else's copyright material in a way that isn't allowed or hasn't been licensed or hasn't been approved. Or we could be talking about infringing moral rights. So using it's like classic academic integrity issue, right? Using somebody else's ideas or data or inputs without attribution, or in a way that attributes it to somebody else, or in a way that messes with the integrity of the work. Or in relation to patents, we could just be talking about using or manipulating that invention in a way that's contrary to an existing patent. Or I can see that there are a couple of other steps that can happen along the way too. So in order to achieve the requirements for a patent, it needs to be novel, which means it needs to not be out in the public domain, which means that it needs to be a secret pretty much up until the time that you make the patent application. Because if it's not novel, if it's not new, you will not get it dealt with. So if actually AI is there and is able to pass data from all sorts of different places, and it's just basically going scraping with or without permission somebody's Google Drive and finding their inventive step and then basically coming up with the invention first or getting it out there into the world, that's infringing. So there are lots of different ways that infringement can happen. So, but what do they know? And maybe, the logic would be, if you're my employee and you rip off somebody else's data and hold it out as your own, and I haven't checked, or I haven't done my due diligence, that I don't have some defense for that, I go and apply for a patent on the basis you're the inventor, but it turns out you lied to me, I don't get any special protections there. So the question is, where's the onus, where's the responsibility? Now, it's kind of a little bit easier to get an employee to show you they're working, right? And it's also easier to have a contract of employment where you're saying to the inventor, and this is happening all the time, people are buying inventors effectively, and they're saying, okay, you're the one who has to warrant that you own the intellectual property rights. It's a little bit harder when we've got a black box AI. So if the AI infringes, we've got a couple of different ways of dealing with that. It could be the prompt right, like the person who's using the AI. It could in fact be the owners of the AI. And there's a lot of push at the moment to say, actually, we need laws that limit the way that AI is written or produced. But what are the risks of that?
I mean, if you limit AI, you're shooting yourself in the foot a bit. Like, even if you look at the new iPhone, because of the new EU AI laws, all of those new AI, Apple Intelligence, whatever that they're selling with the new iPhone, none of those features are going to exist in the EU. So then people in the EU are not going to buy the new iPhone. They're going to be like, well, now I feel ripped off. Like, I don't want to buy the new one. And they're going to get mad at their government because now everyone else has these cool new phones that can do all this
really
stuff
good
automatically, but they can't do it. So then they'll just be...
It's a really argument. So this Adam Thierer and his mates who are saying permissionless innovation. The more restrictions that you put on technologies, the more risk we have that people won't innovate, that there's a disincentive to innovation. Do people really understand what they're giving away when they allow these machines to do things for them? I mean, we kind of missed the boat with social media, right? I suspect that's a genie that's going to be very hard to put in the bottle. I'm fascinated by what's happening with that argument at the moment because I'm thinking, how are they going to... I mean, I'm usually a big picture person, but they're going to need to use artificial intelligence to collect data points about whether or not our user is or isn't a child. So we're actually going to collect more information and data points about children than we ever have before in order to protect them from having information about them. Like, it's kind of crazy, I think, but everybody's in a different situation. These are the kind of issues I want you thinking about for the assignment. And again, I want you to go deep rather than broad. I forgot that. Here I am. I said I was finishing early, and now I've just let you talk too long. I think if you actually go back to where you're sitting, throw something in here, because I would be interested to see what you have. This human in the loop machine learning model is really around thinking about when do we need to make sure that we have humans involved and when can we rely on our AI. And I think that we end up with different kinds of things each time. And it's about kind of mapping. I've given you kind of 4 examples that are used quite regularly of different kind of things that maybe we should be thinking about machines, maybe we shouldn't. But I think the model is kind of interesting. I'm thinking about, well, what shouldn't we delegate? What can we delegate? What's easy for us to do? What's difficult for us to do? And then think about at what point do we need to have humans in that oversight loop. But I don't think it's, in theory it's easy to put things in a quadrant. In practice it can be quite hard to actually come up with something. Oh, we've got people. I love seeing the stuff move around, it just amuses me. And I can see already from the movement we've got a real separation of things. I was interested to see, creative writing is still saying quiet down. It's like it's something that's not really delegable. Oh, actually, sorry, you're putting it in the delegable. I actually think that this is one that I see way over in this space. So, particular medical diagnosis. And I think too that we don't see the same patterns. And I think there's so much that can happen in that space, so much really interesting advance. So this model might be useful for you for thinking about, actually, what do you need your people in your organisation? When do you need them to be looking out? When do you need them to be okay to rely on what's going on? And when don't you? Let's have a look. Let's see where you see the biggest risks. You get 100 points. If there's one that you think is bigger than any of those that I haven't put on the screen, share with me. Oh, I really thought we'd finish early. How did I do that?
And not knowing where the input comes from.
Yeah.
I think, like, with the way technology is going, particularly with blockchain, it's definitely very easy for, like, say, when you were working at that law firm or that company in-house, that everything that you attributed to has a token where this is your work. And
Yeah.
if they ever use any of that again, that automatically goes to you forever. The same thing, if you input your art into it and it gets trained to use in AI, and then even if you use 5% of that to make that, and that makes $1, then you get 5% of that dollar. So then if everything worked like that, it would be...
Yeah, I look, honestly, this is my frustration with blockchain, right? It's, in theory, it could be work like that, but in practice, it needs to be adapted, absolutely. And it needs to be adopted, it needs to be, it's, I don't know, I find it really fascinating. And yeah, it still feels to me like a problem a solution in search of a problem. How many? So, majority of us are seeing as the biggest risk their lack of clarity as to who is liable. And I think that's a real today risk. And I think if that's the one you want to focus on when you're putting your compliance package together, then thinking about who needs to be aware of what in the organisation, what kind of reporting regimes that you might have, what kind of compliance regimes you have, because it can go either way. And if you're investing a lot in developing intellectual property that ultimately you can't exploit, you need to be thinking about, well, how do you manage that? And it may well be that means that you're needing to keep things secret that you wouldn't have kept secret in the past. Okay, get my 10th question so I can award my trophy. Everybody ready? Oh, some very fast players. Woohoo! So yeah, the first two things here. If the output infringes an existing IP right, and if the model is trained on materials. So it's worth thinking about both of those, what the output is, but whether or not there is risk of infringement. With your assignments, go deep rather than broad, pick one. It's your compliance program. Clearly, you will be rewarded for making a good choice, but you don't need to spend a lot of time smattering around with all of the issues. You've got two issues that you're going to be doing this training program on. One relates to the AI big data, and one relates to receiving or making cryptocurrency payments, or both, or potentially recommending against them. Lucas! I think we should all clap. You get a prize. Well done. Thanks for playing hard. All right, I can see that they're waiting for us out there. If you have questions, I'll wait outside for a minute. Thanks for listening if you're on the